Hello and welcome to the Pandaverse. I'm Elgon. I'm here with Christine Gabriel
Hi guys.
and Alisse Lee Goldenberg.
Hi.
And Alisse is one of our friends from way back. She's one of the original members of the Pandamoon publishing family. We call them the Alpha authors. Doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else. It just means we were first.
Yeah.
Alisse is going to give us a reading from one of her books. I'd like to preface this by saying Alisse has written more books than most authors out there. She writes fantasy, she writes folklore. She wrote a zombie book with one of her friends. So she's got quite diverse talents and tastes. What are you going to be reading for us today, Alisse?
Today I'm going to be reading a short section from the Song of Hadariah, which is the first book in the Dybbuk Scrolls trilogy. In this book, we have three girls from our world, Carrie and her two best friends, Rebecca and Lindsay, who are asked to go on a quest to save the magical world of Hadariah from the Dybbuk king Asmodeus. And in the section I'm going to be reading to you, Adom, an emissary from Hadariah, has just asked them to come back to his world to go on this quest. Adom looked Carrie right in the eye. She held her breath, not wanting to break away from his gaze. Could she possibly live up to his expectations? It was a lot of responsibility. At that moment, she was not so sure she could handle it. "Can I please have a moment to discuss this with my friends?" Carrie asked Adom. "Certainly," Adom replied, "but know that time is short." She watched as Adom walked a little ways away. "Guys," Carrie looked at Rebecca and Lindsay. "What do you think we should do?" She tried to gauge their enthusiasm, their skepticism, their willingness to participate. "I'm in," Lindsay said, smiling. "I don't see how I could ever turn my back on someone in trouble," Rebecca said. "Of course I'll help." "You really think we can do this?" Carrie asked. "It seems simple enough on the surface. Go and get some string." "Strings," Lindsay corrected. "And they're liable to be catgut. Most violin strings are." "Whatever," Carrie said. "Anyway, it seems easy until you factor in this demon king. This could be dangerous." She knew she was going to go regardless, but she wanted her friends to be sure. She didn't want them to feel as if they were being pressured into anything. "Of course it will," Rebecca said. "If you read any story, all quests are dangerous. That's kind of the thrill. I can't believe any of this is real. It's kind of awesome." "Yeah," Lindsay added, "it totally is." Carrie nodded, relieved her friends were on the same page. "Okay, what are we waiting for? Let's go." She stood and shouldered her backpack. She saw Rebecca and Lindsay also preparing to leave. "Lead the way," she called to Adom. Adom approached the same bush through which he had appeared. "Follow me," he said, and vanished among the foliage. Carrie stared at the small collection of leaves. How could she possibly fit through that? She hesitated, and one of her hands sought her necklace. She gave a small shrug and got down on all fours. As she approached the bush, she heard her dog barking hysterically from the house. "Bye, Finn," she whispered and crawled forward. Was she shrinking? Was the bush getting larger? Whatever was happening was clearly magic. Carrie crawled onward. Branches and leaves caught in her hair and tore at her pack. The tunnel, for she was now sure there was a tunnel in that collection of twigs, seemed to go on forever. Carrie was keenly aware of everything around her. Her eyes sharply saw each leaf in stark detail, the way the light filtered through the holes in the foliage and dappled everything in a mossy green. She heard every breaking branch under her knees and hands with a sharp, resounding crack that seemed to stab the silence in the air around her. She felt their sharp ends scratch her hands through the velvety moss that carpeted the ground she crawled over. Her lungs breathed in the moist air, cleaner than the air of cities and suburbs, and more real, more nourishing than anything she was used to. She smelled rain, grass, and soil, all of which smelled natural, lacking man-made smells from home. The overabundance of oxygen made her head heavy. Her heart felt as if it would burst. Just as she thought she would never reach the end of the tunnel, she abruptly found herself kneeling under a night sky. surrounded by a primeval forest, the likes of which she had never seen before. Carrie stood up on shaky legs, speechless in another world.
That's good. That's good.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Hey, that was great.
Thanks.
This book's part of a trilogy. I think you've said that. It's based on Eastern European folklore and a lot of background. You studied that when you were in school. You've got a lot of diverse talents too. You're a musician, you're an actress. That kind of figures into your writing a lot too. Like,
It does. Yes.
I don't know if you play the violin. I never asked you before, but
Oh no. I always wanted to, but it never happened.
music plays a pivotal role in everything in this series.
What kind of dog do you have?
He's an Aussie Doodle. Yeah, if you give me 1 second, I could just get someone to handle that. A dog, triplets. It's a full house.
How do you manage to juggle, you know, kids, and you've written so many books. How do you manage to juggle it all? Like, how do you find time to write?
Well, I typically get some writing done while they're at school or when they're asleep. So it's very difficult to do so when they're actually around. They promise they'd be quiet, but it's not working.
You've done a very nice job because your books are fabulous. I mean, they're fabulous.
Thank you.
How old are the triplets now? They're what, like 9 or 10? Something like that?
They're going to be 10 in February.
Ah,
Bye, Joe.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I figured because they were like babies when
They
you started with Pandamoon.
Yeah, they were little tiny babies.
Time does go by fast, doesn't it?
It does.
So what are you up to nowadays?
Nowadays, I just finished the 3rd book in the Children of Colonadona series, and I sent that off to Pandamoon. Hopefully we hear back about that. And I'm working on a series of picture books for younger children about these characters I created who, as Elgon stated, music, theater, all these things play a large part in what I write and what I believe in and what I do. About these 2 children, a brother and sister named Jay and Shiloh, who live in a magical world in the flies of a theater and use music and creativity to help the magical creatures of that world solve their everyday problems.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see them. That's going to be great.
You're a very creative person.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Christine and I were kind of discussing, because we chat a lot online.
Really don't, Elgon. Don't lie.
Wow, we chat.
Every 5 minutes.
I chat with you more than anybody else in the world, which
Oh, no, me
means that
too. Same.
which means that I don't chat with anybody else, actually. Yeah, I was always amazed that you could juggle having triplets, young triplets, and you wrote the Sidnalta series while those kids were like babies.
Yeah.
And I was so blank. Where the heck do you find the time to do that? My life's been kind of upended since I came to the West Coast, and I'm in Vegas now, but I'm helping take care of my grandson, for my son and daughter-in-law, and he's a handful, and he's just one, just one baby.
It was strangely easier to get a lot of writing done when they were babies, because at that point we kind of divided up the childcare into shift work. So we each had time to sleep and time to rest and time to recharge. And and I did a lot of the night shift. And there's nothing good on TV at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was before all the streaming services took off. So it was either watch terrible documentaries or reality series at 3 o'clock in the morning, or I could do my writing, like in between feeds and stuff, because there's no one to distract you. No one's online. No one's calling you at that time of night. So may as well be productive.
Maybe that's what I need to do. I need to start staying up later.
I used to write when I got home from work back in the 90s. I'd come home and I would intend to write for like an hour, and it'd end up being 3 or 4 hours. And then, I would look at the clock and I go, God, it's 4 a.m. I got to be in at work at 7. And I was like, no, might as well just stay up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I finally discovered that I can get Word on my phone and Google Docs on my phone. So if I have free time, I'll sit and I'll just start writing on my phone. It's become handy now.
You should get a Bluetooth keyboard so you can actually type a little faster on your phone.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wrote a lot of my zombie novel on notes on my iPhone because I was doing a lot of it between scenes and rehearsals because I was doing a production of Fiddler on the Roof while I was working on that. And a lot of the cast members ended up getting horribly murdered in the pages of that book. I would like vent all my frustrations out on them that way. Just be like, oh, you didn't know your lines in that one scene that we were supposed to be doing today. You were told this 2 weeks ago. Well, I guess you get your face ripped off. So
that book is that zombie book's bizarre. It's it's a survival book. I mean, all zombie books would be a survival book, but this one's like they're up in the tundra of like northern Canada and fighting off zombies. I mean, it's not like they're getting attacked constantly, but
no,
it's I mean, there's a lot of other things going on in that book. It just happens to be there's been a zombie apocalypse and all this other stuff's happening.
Yeah,
which makes it an interesting book to read.
Yeah, it was fun to write. I wrote it with one of my best friends, Anne Tran, who's amazing, and I provided a lot of actual musical theater stuff in that book, and she wrote a lot of the horrible deaths. So we divided and conquered in that way.
Alter ego character in that book does a lot of the hacking, and
that's how it would be in real life, probably too.
I think a lot of people don't realize that, we create these alter egos that become, maybe not the main characters, but one of the main characters in our books. Yeah. And they do a lot of the things that we would never personally do or wouldn't have the nerve to do or always daydreamed of doing.
Yeah.
If you fantasize about doing horrible things, you should be a writer.
Yeah.
Because it's much more socially acceptable.
Yeah,
it is.
You finished another book in the Children of Colindona.
I did.
That's a sequel it's a sequel series to the Sinalta series. Because it happens. The children are children of Sinalta, and it continues on what's going on in that series. Do you have any other series in mind, or anything else that you're working on?
I've kind of been toying with this novel idea. Well, a couple things. There's this one kind of like a children's ghost story novel that, if I actually get down and finish it, will take place in Stratford, Ontario, about a young girl who moves there with her parents, who's used to the big city, and now she has to acclimate to life in a small town. And she's not used to it, but the weirdness that happens is the one friend that she's able to make turns out to be a ghost. Nice. And she kind of has to figure out the mystery behind where this ghost came from, how she came to be a ghost, and if she solves this mystery, she might end up losing her best friend.
That's a great storyline.
And the other project that I've been working on, also with Anne, is we're trying to take this short story we wrote and turn it into a novel, because we think that there's more there than what we actually started with. And it came about because we were asked to write a romance, and her reaction was, fine, I'll help you write this romance, only if I get to murder the main characters over and over again in fire. And I said, sure. Okay.
Yeah, no
So
problem.
it's about these three people who are trapped in a never-ending love triangle because they wound up cursed. And so they keep getting reborn and finding each other over and over again in different bodies and different guises throughout centuries. But every time they remember what happened, they die horribly in a fire. And it starts over again. So the question is, can they break the cycle and break the curse? Or are they doomed forever to be like, dying over and over and over again like this?
Oh, you got to finish that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good plot.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I've been reading Suicide Souls by Penny Jones, which is coming out in February, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a strange book. Penny's a great writer for a lot of different reasons. I mean, the premise is that the two main characters have committed suicide, and there's a process that they have to go through to rid themselves of the funk of committing suicide and getting back to life, proving themselves in life again. So it presents suicide as something that you really don't want to do, because as much as you think that it's going to be the end of all the complications that you have in your life and you're just getting away from it, it's not like that at all. It only adds to the confusion and the frustrations that you have, because you have to start off by experiencing the grief of all of your loved ones.
Right.
And then once you get to that level, that you finished all the grief period, you have to graduate to the next level. So the book starts off kind of simply, that you're figuring out what's going on with these people, and then it just more and more layers of complication and convolution as the novel goes on.
Mm-hmm.
It's very well done. Highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds great.
What I like about Pandamoon is that authors are allowed to experiment with really strange ideas and things that are sort of out of their genre. We all write paranormal stuff, so I mean, there's nothing strange. There's nothing that would surprise us in a book that we decide to write. Christine's talking about writing a romance too. So
Is it a happy one?
Who knows?
I don't know. That's a fire idea, man. Hey, Lee, so out of all the books that you have written, what is your favorite? Which one do you love the most?
It's like asking her which one of her triplets she likes.
Don't worry. We won't tell you.
It depends on the
your
book.
that one.
I don't know which one I love the most, but I think I'm proudest so far of the City of Arches, because I liked the idea of fleshing out the backstory of where all this started with the characters in the Sitnalta series and everything, and having a main character who's fallible and human, but also differently abled, like to explore the character of Sitnalta's mother, who we learn through the book is actually deaf, and kind of writing from a completely different perspective than what I know, and having friends of mine who are part of the deaf community and everything here in Toronto, like, go through it. So really any mistakes I made in representing them are mine entirely, but I did my best to kind of look at what challenges and everything a character like that would have, and it took a lot of work and research and time that I hope showcased that character as well as possible. But also, I'm very proud of the one that I just submitted to Pandamoon, the third one in The Children of Colin, which tentatively is called The Crash of Worlds. I don't know 100% if I'm sold on the title, but it is what it is right now. But I'm taking the series in a completely different direction. It was a typical Sitnalta story, going through it until literally the last paragraph, where I had an oh my god idea, and now I think the series may be devolving into horror, but we'll see.
What? That's awesome!
I'm sorry, Zara, but that's where it's going.
I cannot wait. That's gonna be awesome.
You could even merge the zombie apocalypse into the story
You
too.
can link them all together.
It may well happen. So I think I may have killed off one of our publisher's favorite characters, so she's going to be mad about that, and then she's going to go through the epilogue and be like, what did you do?
Oh no, Zara's gonna be watching and she's gonna be like, oh no, Alisse.
She's going to be mad.
I did that to her too on one of the books. I don't know if it was her favorite character, but it's my alter ego character. I set up a scene where he got severely injured and he died as a result of his injuries.
I don't know about you, but it's one of my favorite things when I get her editing notes back during the finals or even the preliminary stages where I do something to one of her characters and then I get these like caps lock notes on the side going, Allie, no, why? With like a sad face, and I'm like,
You get from every author some of the notes where she said things like that. And we should do a segment on it, and that way Zara can see, it'll show everybody how much our publisher loves us and our characters.
Zara reads every one of these books, and she reads them before they're signed to be published.
Yeah.
And then she reads them again when they're through the editing process. So she sees the entire evolution of the book from start to finish, which is remarkable in itself. And she reads every book at least twice.
Yeah,
You know?
she sure does. Fantastic.
I don't think the average reader knows, but books can change a lot during the course of of the editing. The ending can change. Things about the characters can change. My first book with Pandamoon, I actually added a few chapters.
Or you can remove parts of,
Yeah,
chapters.
that happens a lot too. You really don't need your editor will say, this entire chapter is unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this before that, what you're writing is sometimes intended for you and you alone. The process of you explaining to yourself what's going on and the characters. And then when you go back and read it, when you're revising it, or you have a good editor that points it out to you, you suddenly realize, well, yeah, that's really not necessary. It kind of distracts from the flow, and the pacing is very important. And you have to pay attention to that. Otherwise, you're going to lose the reader.
Yeah, I had a whole chapter in the second Sit and Alta book, The Kingdom Thief, that revolved around time travel. And I loved it for the character beats that it contained and how it had set up stuff that had happened in the first book and everything. But through the editing process, we cut that entire thing because it just disrupted where the story had gone and the climax of it and everything. And they were right. The book was tighter and more concise, and the adventure flow of the story was a lot better without it. But it hurt to cut all that stuff.
Those things happen when you're writing too. So
Yeah.
you'll end up with a lot of stuff in a drawer or catch-all file on your computer that probably never going to get published, but you keep it for a while just in case. And then eventually you either throw it away or you delete it because you're never going to use it again. And sometimes you'll write something in a book and it's a tangent. It goes off in the wrong direction, and you eliminate it almost immediately because it's not going where you meant to take the story. And then there's other times that you feel like the characters are telling you their story, and you're just typing it out.
Yeah, that's how quite a few of the deaths in my series, like all the series has happened, was basically the character was telling me, no, this is how my story has to end here, because there's nowhere else for it to go. And for everyone else around me, my death has to happen at this point. And sometimes it hurt, but yeah, like the kids have come in and I'm sitting there crying over the computer and they're like, what did you do? I'm like, I killed somebody. But
And it follows you around and haunts you for several days because
yeah,
the characters that you develop are important to you. They become real people, and you've got to go through a process of mourning them and grieving for the characters. I suppose that's a good sign because the reader's going to feel that too. But it's a tough experience to get through. So I mean, not only do you, as a writer, not only do you grieve the real people that you lose in your life, but you also grieve the characters.
Yeah, that's why that's partly why City of Arches was so hard to write. Even though it's the third book of the series, it was very much a prequel story. And so from page 1, I knew exactly where the characters had to end up, and the readers know exactly where most of the characters end up because they hear about it in the prologue of the first Etnalta book. So how do you make them care? How do you make them want to go on that journey? And while writing it, even though I knew which characters were completely doomed, I was like, part of me wants to know if there's a way to kind of retcon this and finagle this so I don't have to do it, but no, you can't. And it kind of stays with you. You just kind of go, I created you, I've destroyed you. So it's tough as a writer sometimes.
I think I've told you before that you're a lot more organized than I am as a writer. You have more than a vague idea of where your books are going when you start them. And, I'll sit down and start writing something and I have no idea where the story's going. And
same way.
And, I mean, Christine and I are both what the industry calls pantsers. We do it by the seat of our pants.
We do.
And if there's ever an outline applied to the material, it's applied to it somewhere between the final revision before we submit it and putting it to an editor. So there is some organization laid on top of the material and stuff gets moved around that way. So it's not like there's no organization to it. It tends to be more like life in general because the life that you experience doesn't really have an outline to it. I mean, you may try to do that.
Yeah.
You may put a structure, well, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to study this, I'm going to, you try to do that in your life, but life keeps throwing stuff at you. I think because of the way that I write and because of the way Christine writes, you get a lot more spontaneity into the writing and in the immediate instance that you're writing it. Mm-hmm. It's not always a good thing because sometimes when I'm writing, as I'm writing, I'm going, oh my God,
I say that a lot when I'm writing.
Yeah, the last, I have to admit that the last book I finished, The Crash of Worlds, I started out very much as a plotter. Like, this is where it has to go because this is where I intend to go with the rest of the series. And this is what is going to happen. Halfway through the book, I hated it. So I was like, and I threw out all my notes and all of that stuff. And I'm like, okay, let's just see where the characters are going to take me. And that's how we may or may not have wound up with zombies. But we'll see.
See, sometimes you just have to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're going through a period where, you've always been writing according to an outline. And, I've heard this from other people because I've never experienced it myself, of course, but, they'll have something all plotted out on an outline and it's all figured out. And you think you've figured out every little detail. And then you get to the point where you're writing it and you realize that, oh, gee, wait, that can't be that way because of this. I went through the experience of writing 10 books that aren't published yet. And I wrote the books 3 through 6? No, 3 through 7. I wrote books 3 through 7 as one book because at the time that I was writing it, I had no idea how long this book's going to be. I figure I'm writing a book. That was basically all I was writing, and it was like an offshoot from another book that I was writing. What I wanted to do was I wanted to feather all this into the series that I was writing, and eventually it just sort of branched off and became its own thing. And as I was writing that, I wrote the first, let's say, 5 books but they were all one book. And the story was much more compressed and not as much detail. So it was about 400 pages. And as I went through and revised it, the story kept growing and more offshoots and more things developed. And, 6 years later, 5 years later, I'm to the point where I'm finished with that. And I said, well, there's actually some more that has to happen. So I started writing the next 3 books. And I figured it'd be 3 more books. So I've got 5 books now, and I've got 3 more books I'm going to add on to it. I'm about halfway through the second book in that one. And I'm going, I don't know enough about what happened before all that other stuff that happened in the book. So I started writing a prequel. And I write this prequel, and now I'm like, oh, well, that changes everything in the first 5 books I wrote. So I had to go through and I basically rewrote everything up to the point where I'm on book 8. And I write, book 8, finish book 8 and write book 9. And okay, I've got to go back and I got to fix this. I got to go fix this. Now, if I wrote by an outline, maybe I wouldn't have suffered as much of the grief and going back through and rewriting everything. But also, the series wouldn't have been quite the same because there wouldn't be as many elements of surprise and everything else in it. So you have to get to the point where you write things as they need to be written. You can't overthink things. You can't, force things because it'll feel that way when the reader reads it. And, if you're telling a story, it needs to evolve naturally. It needs to expose itself, reveal itself to the reader in kind of a logical, natural progression. And then, you can have surprises that appear here and there in the book because you need those. Otherwise, the reader will fall asleep. That's what I learned from that experience. And then I have other people reading it and they tell me things that, are in there that I don't realize are in there. And I go back and I look at it and I go, okay, well, that's not what I wanted to say there. I got to go back and fix that. So it's hard to write a series like that. But the benefit of that is you don't write something in book 1 and it's published and it's out in the world. And you're in book 3 and you go, oh, gee, I wish I'd fixed this in book 1.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the issues with prequels. Like, you have to make sure that everything dovetails nicely with what's already out there in the world. Because if you write something like, readers are very adept at finding a writer's mistakes when it comes to continuity.
Yeah. We overlook things as authors because we read what we think is there. We don't necessarily read what is actually there. With rare exception, authors are bad editors of their own material.
I agree.
I am the worst when it comes to editing my own stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I do my best to give everything a nice pass through before I send it off, but I really rely on the other Panda people to come in and be like, no, that's not what happened.
There's a lot of really trivial crap that's in there. Like, you'll have an extra period, the quotation marks will be in the wrong place. But, I'm not talking so much about that. You'll leave out articles like and, the, here and there in the book because, as you're typing it, you don't even think about it. You've skipped it. Or, autocorrect did something to it while you were typing. That's another thing too, people. Turn off autocorrect.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's awful.
It's so awful.
Yeah, I mean, there are too many names I created out of thin air that autocorrect tries to make into words that I've taught my autocorrect the names, so I don't have to keep going back. But
that's a problem with fantasy writers because we have those names in our books.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the events take place in a different dimension. They take place on another planet, another culture, ancient history. So you have names with funny little marks in the middle of them. Word doesn't like that. Microsoft Word is written for business writing.
Yeah.
The code in it is supposed to be for business writing. So you have to realize that.
Well, I do everything on Pages on my Mac, which isn't much better, with regards to
Right.
that. And so for the Dybbuk scrolls, it was having, I don't know what was wrong with it. It was just freaking out over everything with all the Yiddish and Hebrew stuff I'd thrown in there. It was like, no, none of this is English. You need to fix it. I'm like, no, this is what it should be. Turn it off so I don't have to look at red lines on every sentence I write.
There are a lot of writing programs out there. One of them is called Scrivener. I like Scrivener for what it does. You can use it as a word processor. It pretty much sucks as a word processor. But you could actually write an entire book in Scrivener. And if you used all the tools, you would have little note cards and, you can find anything, because of the way that you wrote it and you associated other things with it. So it makes it really easy to go back and edit it. I don't write that way.
No.
But you can write a book in Word and then take it into Scrivener, import the whole thing and divide it up into chapters, and you can move it around. That's how I use it. Because it's real easy to do it, because you can move 3 chapters, all at once without having to scroll through the entire document and moving them around. And you can also divide up your book into individual discrete chapters and export that chapter out as a Word document and edit that way. So I've tried all kinds of different methods over the years. As much as I like what you can do in Scrivener, it's limited. It's not a good word processor. Word is a decent word processor. As long as you know its limitations, you turn off autocorrect and the spelling correct, or you just get used to adding your weird words into the dictionary that it has in it, or it's a lexicon. It's not really a dictionary. But if it sees a familiar word that you've added in there, it will skip over and it doesn't try to correct it. But make sure you spell it right.
No kidding.
My office, I don't know if you can see, but I have no door. So I'm literally tucked up in the upstairs hallway that they had put some built-ins up there. So I went, okay, that looks like a nice quiet office space, because I work when the kids are sleeping or when they're at school. So I don't need a door since I do all my work when they're not around. Now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, I'm finding my quiet time is dwindling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were the first author signed, I believe, or one of the first.
I think I was.
Yeah, I think you were the first. We had a launch party. I remember that because that was a launch party where I met Rose Montague.
Yeah.
There's a couple other authors I met at that party. That was a strange launch party. We had a lot of things going on.
Yeah, we did.
That's not a good sign.
We had somebody that worked with us back then that did the launch parties.
Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember those.
Those are fun. Those are the good old days.
Yeah, because none of us knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
So,
No.
There's some I still don't.
Yeah, we're more experienced in our ignorance now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was some interesting times. And Pandamoon was learning what they were doing too. I mean, we weren't Christine and I weren't publicists yet, working with them. So we were like everybody else. But we all kind of bonded together and tried to help each other out as much as possible, promoting each other's stuff. And that actually became kind of the tradition in Pandamoon as everybody else came in. I mean, we've had authors that, didn't want to play, in the sandbox with us, and they ended up leaving. And and we've had other authors that have come in and really liked the environment and flourished in it. So Zara's pretty good at screening people, but when you want to have your book published, you'll say anything. I don't think most people realize that it's a lot of work besides just writing your book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing to go out and do book signings and go to book fairs and go to conventions and keep your name out in the public. And, it's hard because there's a million new books. That's just a rough estimate. There's a million new books every year. And your book gets lost if you don't keep putting it out in front of the people.
Yeah, that's the trick, getting people to know who you are.
Yep.
And it seems so simple. It sounds so simple, but it's really hard.
As an author, you have to be willing to toot your own horn a lot.
Mhm.
And that's not a natural thing for most of us to do. I mean, we tend to be, we like sitting alone in a room and writing and creating a nice world where things obey the laws that we like,
Mhm.
I mean, this is the perfect environment for the world. The world's not like that.
What advice would you give to new writers? People that are out there trying to get their work published. What advice would you give them?
I would tell them to actually write. I mean, I know a lot of people who say, oh, I'd love to be a writer. Well, then sit down and write your story. Because once you finish your story, you finish your book, you know what you want to do with it. You have a much better idea of where it should go. And then research your publishers before you send things out. Know who you're sending it to. Know that they will actually be a good fit for your work. And to just keep trying, because I had a lot of rejections before I got accepted by Pandamoon, by anyone. So it was a lot of I'm sorry, but no's before I finally got that yes. So don't give up. Just keep putting yourself out there. Just keep trying, because eventually someone somewhere will see something in your work that you see there too, and they'll give you that yes.
You got to believe in your book. If you believe in it, you have to make other people believe in it. There are times when your first book isn't intended to be published.
Yep.
And, maybe you need somebody else to tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you believe in your book and, it's a good story and there's probably some reason why it's not being published or somebody's not picking it up for publication, take the no as a not yet and then go back and figure out what's wrong with it and fix it.
Yeah, definitely.
Nobody comes out of the chute writing a perfect novel.
No.
Not at all.
We're going to draw this to a close because we've been on air for an hour now. And
We missed you, Alisse. Oh my gosh.
It was nice seeing you.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
Yeah.
the last time we were all together was Comic-Con.
yeah,
Fantastic.
C2E2. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we had the best time.
Yeah, that was a blast.
It's been a long, hard several months not doing any of the cons that I'm used to. I miss my pirate friends at the Pirate Festival. I miss my Fan Expo people. I miss all of that, and I can't wait until we could actually dress up all crazy and see each other again.